The next topical issue is in the name of Deputy Aengus Ó Snodaigh, and it's to do with the negative effects of the funding cuts to youth projects in Dublin City, which were being imposed by the City of Dublin Youth Services Board. Deputy, 4 minutes.
I think it's very important that the Minister is here to listen, and hopefully I can impress upon you to do whatever is necessary to avoid cuts to some of the projects that have been listed, and they're not all within my own constituency, but I will obviously concentrate on the projects that I know best. And that these projects in the main are in working class areas, disadvantaged areas, whichever title you want to go, but they tick all of the boxes that have always been listed as areas of major need. They're areas where the drug problem has been at its height. In the past, where there was low educational attainment, and much has been done in recent years, and that cycle is broken. But if we continue with the cuts, not only in relation to the youth services themselves, you might end up back and creating that cycle once again. It is an area, in many cases, of very violent crime, but it's also, these areas are often those which have severe poverty. They're impoverished in many, many ways. And whereas in richer areas in Dublin, or more affluent areas, there might be a call, or the community might be able to call on itself to fund or to help part fund some of the projects. That is not an option in the main in most of these. Even the groups that I've worked with, they are imaginative in terms of fundraising. They have tried everything. They have sat down and looked at every single grant that is available, not only in Ireland but throughout the world. They've appealed to philanthropists to fund. So they've looked at alternative fundings. They have pared all of their overheads right down to the bone, because this isn't the first cut. This is after a series of cuts. They have, in many cases, pared back their services. They have pared back on wages and on the administration costs. So it's not as if they aren't aware of the need to be prudent in this day and age. They have done that. They have done that in buckets in many cases. Yet, they were told before Christmas to expect maybe a 3 or 4 or even a 5% cut. But some of the projects that have been listed by the City of Dublin Youth Services Board, the cuts are huge to them, because they've pared. And I'm not going to deal with two of the groups, which Focus Ireland and Candle, which are substantial, and there are major reasons for that. I do have a problem in some ways, because there is an alternative funding already in place to capture that. Maybe the Minister is looking at that herself, for the organisations. But the groups like the base, in Ballyfermot. The base in Ballyfermot has been pared, and it looks attractive, the size of the funding. But their funding has been cut back by 14%. Now, 14% doesn't sound huge if we were in an era of plenty. But when you cut basically €60,000 from a budget of an organisation which is dealing with the most disadvantaged children in Dublin 10, that is a huge cut. That means job losses, that means curtailment of services, that means closure on certain days. The same could be said the Ballyfermot Youth Service, and I know Deputy Conaghan is here, and he'd know some of the groups that I'm listing, and he'll know the effects of such a cut of 14% on the Ballyfermot Youth Service, or as I said, the base. Like, 73,000 is suggested that come out of their budget. That is substantial in itself.
You can come back in a moment.
How much?
Your time is up.
Time is up. There's a whole range. So, Minister, I know that the final decision doesn't necessarily lie with yourself, but you can sign off or refuse to sign off on what has been presented to you by the City of Dublin Youth Service Board. I urge you not to sign off on cuts of that scale, and to look again to ensure that services don't end up reducing their service or reducing their hours, especially in this time for young people.
Minister, 4 minutes, just under 4 minutes, Minister.
Thank the Deputy for raising this issue of support for youth services, and I know the services that you refer to. I've been to the base in Ballyfermot, and I know the work of the Ballyfermot Youth Services, and certainly I want to support as much as I possibly can the work that has been done by youth services in Dublin and indeed throughout the country. And I recognise the value of it, and I'd like to be investing more in it if that was feasible. Just to say, in 2013 my department will provide funding of 53.173 million to support the provision of youth services and programmes throughout the country, including in particular, as you rightly say, in disadvantaged communities. And that funding supports national youth work, it supports local youth work. There's about 1,400 paid staff, there's 40,000 volunteers, and there's 400,000 young people participating in youth services and activities in Ireland. And I think, in fact, what we need to do is bring more exposure to the work that is being done and make sure that youth work is recognised for what it gives to young people in terms of continuum of services. And it certainly has a huge role to play, which I'll be focusing on during my EU presidency of the Youth Council in terms of helping young people participate in training and eventually employment as well. So I think that aspect of youth work needs to be looked at increasingly. However, like all areas of the public sector, and as my colleague before me said, the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, we have had to find savings as part of the CRE, the Comprehensive Review of Expenditure. We have to play our part in, as part of the collective government effort to reduce our unsustainable day-to-day deficit. That is the reality for my department as well as other departments. And the CRE that was published in December 2011 set out clearly the savings required for my department in each of the years, 2012, 13 and 14. And I published that along with the detail of what would happen to all of this funding over the 3-year period, and that was known to everybody involved. So I just want to make that point. When we published the review, we had a 7-page chapter outlining the savings that we did have to require from the youth work funding schemes, and it did come to close to 10%. And the administrating bodies who administer these grants on behalf of the department were notified about this, and of course would have been familiar, totally familiar with what was in the CRE for the 3-year period in question. Now, in the course of the past few weeks and months, obviously I've met with representatives of the youth sector with a view to determining how best to minimise the impact of the reduction in the 2013 budget on youth services. Excuse me, given the challenging budgetary situation we are facing. And the administering bodies have been asked to look at issues like, and you mentioned them yourself, Deputy, they have been asked to look at issues like salary levels, they've been asked to look at conditions, administrative costs across projects and services, if these have not already been addressed. And I do want to protect, as far as possible, obviously, the frontline services that youth workers and youth services are providing to very vulnerable young people. Now, what I've also done is in order to try and maximise the use of the funding available for youth services and programmes, I have given flexibility to the local bodies who administer the grants, normally the VCs, to propose the reconfiguration of the allocations provided, having regard to the knowledge available to these bodies about the needs of young people at local level. So there is a flexibility built in to those who administer the schemes to examine each project and come back to me with recommendations. As you say, it will come back to me in the end. So it isn't within that context that last week the City of Dublin Youth Service Board, as the local grant administering body in the Dublin area, submitted a proposal to the department requesting that percentage reductions different to those outlined in the CRE would be applied to projects in the Dublin area. Now, their rationale, as they said it to me, was to minimise the disruption to services. And they said they had examined each of the projects and they'd made recommendations based on the examination of those projects. And in their analysis, in fact, the majority of projects would receive cuts less than 10%. Many of the projects would receive cuts, for example, of 2%. And they looked particularly at the smaller projects, and they wanted to ensure they would continue because they felt they were providing a valuable service. They also said that some of the larger projects would receive greater reductions, hence the projects you mentioned, who are receiving larger funding. and I do appreciate that they have made huge efforts to manage within that funding, but that's the recommendation.
Minister,
that has
just
come
point
to
out the time's actually up, but if
All
there's a
right, so
very
if I
quick point
conclude
which you
by
want to
saying
wrap
that
up.
I'm examining the proposals that have come in from the CDYSB. My department officials met last Friday with the board, and we are examining the proposals that have come in. There is no cut at present provided for the local voluntary youth clubs, and some other funding has also been made available, as you will see from the note that has been circulated to you, for the support of youth work this year. So I'm examining the proposals and the approach that the board have taken, and I will make a decision in relation to it
Thanks,
shortly.
Deputy. I'm afraid there's only
just in relation to the value of the services being provided.
Sorry, Deputy, I'm afraid there's only a minute left just for back and forth.
I hope that I have impressed upon you not to proceed with some of the large-scale, even though they're large-scale organisation, a cut-off 2 or 3% can be the difference between staying open one day and not. And kind of, it's not just my own area. The likes of Bradog in the North Inner City, 14% cut. The Sphere in Darndale, 122,000. That for any organisation would be huge. That means jobs will go. Jobs means kind of less service. So don't forget the cumulative effect, for instance, my own constituency is nearly 500,000 taken out, and that's not including the Focus Ireland cut. And that is substantial for youth services in a single constituency, but across the way, the whole lot. And this is on top of cuts, as I said, child benefit, maternity benefit, tax, kind of the likes of DESH, SNAs, and a whole range of others. That's where the money in the past might have been found. You might have been able to appeal to parents to pay an extra donation. They can't, and that means that the services, which in many cases have changed their work practice and everything else to accommodate change in terms of funding, they can't take any more cuts to the scale.
Minister, did you want to respond just very briefly? Yeah,
I will examine in detail the impact of the proposed changes in budget allocation, and I certainly will try to ensure that we make the most equitable possible decision in relation to the changes in funding, and we will make every effort to preserve jobs and opening hours, and we will make the decision in the most equitable way possible.
Thank you very much.